discovered. And he explains in my book how this would work to create zero gravity bubble. And he feels very strongly that this would open time travel as well as warping space. So I don't know. It may take us, but you can explain the different kinds of ETs that people say are from one bunch is from this planet, the Zetas look this way, and the Nordics look that way, whatever planet they're supposed to be from.
Tonight, we discover the overlooked evidence that UFO occupants are time-traveling humans. Have aliens visited Earth, and have we missed a huge piece of the UFO puzzle? Diane Tessman is in the studio, and we're discussing future humans and the UFOs. Time for new thinking. That and more coming right up on My Alien Life. My Alien Life is recorded live from atop the Northern Rocky Mountains and is available on Spotify, Stitcher, iTunes, and everywhere fine podcasts are found. My website is at www.myalienlifepodcast.com. There you will find my email address, all previously recorded shows, and more. I am Cameron Brower. This is My Alien Life, and the podcast starts right now.
My Alien Life Podcast.
Three, two, one, zero, and liftoff.
My guest tonight is the founder and director of the Star Network Cat Sanctuary and Wildlife Refuge in Iowa, and she has a new book. It's out February 1st and called Future Humans and the UFOs. Diane Tessman, thank you so much for joining me and welcome.
Oh, I'm pleased to be here.
It's great to have you. The first thing I want to talk about is I looked you up on Flying Disc Press, and I want to talk about the cover of your new book. Is that a beautiful piece of artwork or what? It's amazing.
Oh, it is. It was done by a graphic artist in Poland. I think he does cartoon or works for a cartoon studio, and then does this. Phil Mantle employs him for book covers, and I liked it because he's a big Star Trek fan, original Star Trek, and so am I, of course. So we hit it right off, and we designed the insignias on the two UFO occupants' uniforms.
Does have essence of Star Trek for sure, and
it does.
It looks amazing on the Flying Disc Press website, and I love it very much. So it's nice to have you on. So tell me about this book, and what I want to know is, I think that this isn't your first book, I know. So tell me, what is it about aliens and UFOs that got you writing again and discovering the possibility that they could be time travelers?
I've been writing all along, but I haven't done a book since 2013. This premise is one that I've always favored. I was a field investigator with APRO, the old Aerial Phenomenon Research Organization, and also a state section director with MUFON back in the late 70s, early 80s. And so I always investigated objectively and scientifically, but within myself, I've always favored the theory that the UFO occupants may be time travelers as well, perhaps as ETs. But if not ETs, I mean, I know that the galaxy and the universe is full of advanced ET races, but I'm not sure they come here. They probably do as well, so I'm not trying to go to war and have an ET versus time traveler. But I think that the majority of UFO occupants are children's children.
Right. And on your bio in Amazon, you mentioned Dr. Michael Masters, and he and I are kind of neighbors in the high mountains of Montana, and he's been on the show before. Have you studied his work and read his book?
Yes, I have, and his book came out before mine, and his is so splendidly academic. Mine covers a bit more different topics like abductions, and he's so good on the fact that evolution tends to go in the direction that the aliens, quote unquote aliens, look like, the small humans and the atrophied muscles and all of that. So yes, I'm familiar with all of his work, and he's got a chapter in my book. So that works out nicely.
Very cool. Yeah, he was on, and of course, if you've ever listened to me, I come from an anthropology background, so to me that's very interesting.
Yes, when I was 4 and 5 years old, I had 2 UFO abductions, and I was actually told that they said, "We're from your future." Now, that's one of the few things I remember about them. I had hypnotic regression with Dr. Sprinkle, the famous Dr. Sprinkle that worked with a lot of abductees.
Right.
But I have always remembered consciously that it got into my mind, "We are from your future." And I know, they could have been lying, but I've lived with it since I was 4 or 5 years old. And then when I was 9, I noticed a scar on the outside of my lip between my nose. There's a membrane inside your mouth between your nose and your gum, the upper part of your teeth. Well, mine, eventually I realized mine was missing. It started with the very thin laser-like scar on the outside. And so that always bugged me. I got interested in UFOs, read a lot of Brad Steiger's early books, and ironically, nicely became friends with him and Sherry much later in life. But I had my daughter taught school for 11 years. I worked with ESL children. Many of them had just come over from Southeast Asia. It was in the days of the end of the Vietnam War. And the school I worked at in Florida wasn't doing anything with them. They just sat there. They had just arrived, traumatized. Many of them had seen, I found out later, had seen bodies floating in the river, and their parents had been on the losing side, and they didn't speak any English, and had entered the school older than, because they were shorter than most Americans, they entered school when they were actually older than first grade, so that was all a great experience. But eventually, my teaching career, I taught for 11 years, but I'm not a born teacher. I'm a writer, and a little bit more haunted by my childhood experiences than to spend my life as a very sort of conforming teacher. So then I had been doing the investigations with MUFON and APRO and all. But then I went into writing a newsletter and beginning to, well, I don't call it channel, I call it a shared consciousness that I begin to feel very sharply in my 30s. And I suppose I'd always kind of felt it. But I made it a real thing to myself rather than just kind of ignoring it or wondering. And so I started my own newsletters, which are still going. And they're more along the spiritual line, more for the entire species than for individuals. I never considered myself a psychic, but we had many years ago, warned of global climate chaos and the abuse of Mother Earth and things like that, like Whitley Strieber did with the superstorm predictions. And so from then on, I've written 5 books. This will be my 6th. And with this one, I've gone more scientific speculation, which I've done in recent years. I still do the spiritual writing and feeling as well, but I feel like it's time that the UFO community took this into consideration on a nuts and bolts basis, that may be us in those flying machines.
Interesting. You find out that you're missing some tissue, and obviously I don't know when that was and how old you were, but when was that period of your life, and how did it disappear? How do you speculate that it disappeared, and why?
It would have I had, when I was 3 and 4, I was a very thin, kind of sickly child. I had strep throat quite often, heavy nosebleeds, and I think today I might have been tested for childhood leukemia. The abductions I have researched back and placed at the time I was 4, and a second one probably when I was 5. And by the time I was 5 and a half, I was bouncing off the chandeliers and did a lot of acrobats and just full of energy and became very healthy, which has remained with me. So the membrane was probably taken during the abductions, but I did ask my parents. They were very doting, loving parents. Did I hit my mouth on my tricycle? I researched it and found that mountain biking sometimes people hit their mouths. And no, I never did mountain biking. I did have a tricycle. They said they didn't know what happened. They were totally flabbergasted. And I thought maybe, I think that membrane is slit sometimes to make it easier for a newborn to suckle, but that they didn't think that happened. And so I researched it up and down, and even if the missing membrane has nothing to do with my UFO experiences, I still have those experiences. But I do think it's kind of an interesting piece of evidence. Bud Hopkins was interested in putting me in missing time when he was doing scars and tissue taking and whatnot of abductees, but I decided against it. I just didn't want to expose myself that much at that time. I was still teaching school. So I first noticed when I was 9 years old and played around with makeup sort of for the first time. I noticed the scar on the outside of my mouth, but it took years to realize it was actually, you don't know what you're missing until you miss it, that it was a missing membrane.
So that's not unusual for people to suffer some kind of trauma like that. And obviously there had to have been some trauma somewhere, but it's so common for people not to have a memory of that, or even memorize or have a memory of the pain of that. So how do you account for that?
Right. I can't really, except that I was very young, and I don't know when it happened. My memory that I remember consciously, because I remembered a lot more under regression, but not the membrane part of it. Still haven't had any recollection of that. But the part that I do remember consciously is sitting on an Earth-like bench, a park bench, and this man, a human, sitting about a foot away from me and talking to me, possibly in my head. I don't know if it was telepathy or talking. And the only thing that made him not human possibly, were his amber-colored eyes that were almost translucent. And, was he artificial intelligence there? Because that makes you think of Data from Star Trek. I don't know. My spidey sense told me he was human. I didn't have any fear, and maybe they gave me something for my fear. It was kind of leave it to me to have an oddball abduction because I ended up feeling worried about him. Maybe it was Stockholm syndrome, but I felt that he gave me something that he would then not have himself. Gave me a view, I guess, a shared consciousness, and I didn't know what would happen to him. But I was very young. I was a smart kid and kind of an observer. I wasn't. I was just very entranced by the whole thing, quite frankly, and spent my life. It changed my life. And I don't have any regrets.
One thing I want to ask you is, I've had a lot of people on the show, and definitely they talk about the link to humans and extraterrestrials by DNA, and possibly extraterrestrial need for DNA samples. In your research, what would be the most likelihood, and why would extraterrestrials need our DNA?
I don't think they would. That's my. I think humans might in the future.
Right.
I don't think extraterrestrials, as Mike Masters has probably mentioned, could use it. Their DNA, if they even have what we would consider DNA, would be so different. Probably we're more like an earthworm than we are an ET, because all life forms on Earth, I believe, have a similar formula for DNA. That isn't my field of expertise, but no, I think future humans might have several reasons for wanting it. The sperm level is down in human males and is still falling. Possibly we've contaminated the Earth enough that we're not as healthy, as vigorous as we were. So many animals aren't. They might have had DNA damage in deep space travel, or there might have been a nuclear war that hasn't happened yet. Or perhaps, as Mike tends to say, this is just the way evolution is going. Not in 250 years, they would probably still look like us. But once you get the key to time travel, there would be many phases of future humans. Some might be 1,000,000 years ahead or 500,000 years ahead. And here we sit at our computers, our muscles wasting away. I guess in autopsies like Leonard Stringfield's crash retrieval autopsies, the military, all the Wright-Patterson stuff, it's in my book. They found that there's a cat on my table. Wait a minute. Let's see. The autopsies, edit. That they were very human. One body had one of the alien bodies had breasts, and those were basically small humans that Leonard Stringfield reported on from the saucer crashes that ended up at Wright-Patterson, the bodies that were taken to Wright-Patterson. They weren't alien. They were what we used to call midgets, but apparently that's become politically incorrect. Dwarfs, small, and perhaps sometimes they wear goggles or something and have the big black eyes. But in the 50s and 60s, they're like in Travis Walton's mid-70s or 1972, I think. The aliens, one kind of alien he saw, were simply seen to be small humans with a few differences. And then the golden humans, as he called them, that were the proper size, the being I met was much like a golden human, much like Travis's description of golden humans.
And I think I would agree with you, and I did with Mike as well, that that what we see and what we perceive possibly as extraterrestrials, and what I was getting at, are so incredibly like us and have so many similarities. It would seem unlikely that some other race of organism would evolve those same types of morphological characteristics that we have and that we use.
Exactly.
And the other thing is, I think that people tend to, if they disagree with me, they tend to have the school of thought that possibly, there's some hybridization going on, which that's for another time and place. But again, any idea how far into the future that what we're seeing and what people are experiencing and what people have seen in the past and presently, how far into the future do you think that we would look like that?
I don't really have any idea of exactly how far. I do think that at the rate our science is going, I think we're the forefathers and foremothers of there's a huge explosion in science and technology right now. We may be backward spiritually, but we're really, it seems like 5 years is now equal to 200 years of progress, I read somewhere.
Right.
So
the quickening, right?
Yeah. So perhaps in 75 years, we'll get the time travel formula once the quantum computers are really online, because they're online, but they're just being developed. But maybe in 50 years, maybe Jack Sarfatti's formula is right. It's in my book, and maybe it's wrong, but with the metamaterials, and apparently all sorts of exotic materials are being discovered. And he explains in my book how this would work to create zero gravity bubble. And he feels very strongly that this would open time travel as well as warping space. So I don't know. It may take us, but you can explain the different kinds of ETs that people say are from one bunch is from this planet, the Zetas look this way, and the Nordics look that way, whatever planet they're supposed to be from. But to come across the vast distances of space and to hang around Earth probably for millennia, at least since 1947, I think space explorers would probably have traveled on. Like Jacques Vallee says in the book, they would probably maybe have 5,000 landings over a year, or if not landings, 5,000 missions and look over the land and the life forms and the oceans. And then it seems ETs would travel on. But this phenomenon seems to belong here.
Right.
It's been here for probably thousands of years. And I think when Kenneth Arnold saw the flying saucers in 1947, we jumped to the ET conclusion because it's both frightening and exciting. You get a shot of adrenaline when you think of an actual alien, of an extraterrestrial, but it's not logical for a number of reasons. And of course, people think that aliens look like, we get to assuming they look like actors on movies that play aliens, but those are humans. But we haven't thought it through very thoroughly. We leap to that alien conclusion too quickly.
And I think that when people are listening to you and I talk about this right now, it should be noted that, and I feel this about you and just knowing you briefly and reading about you, that you are a fairly objective person. And I wouldn't say that your mind is 100% made up if somebody had some good data that they'd like to share with you and it looked reasonable, right?
Right. Yeah. Right. To me, this connects the the dots connect so well with this theory. But I'm open. If it turns out otherwise, that's okay with me. I still think we need to. I think we need to connect to ourselves again as a species. We're in the doldrums right now. We've taken 3 steps backwards and 1 step forward. And we don't even, a lot of us think we won't survive. So we need, maybe we won't, but we're really not going to if we don't have any pride, any like Buzz and Neil on the moon. Everybody in the world looked at that on their TV screens. And we need more of that. So that's really my goal, almost more than proving the future human premise.
Let's assume that in the future we do have the technology of time travel, and it would make sense to me that it would be used and be used frequently. How can we use time travel and not alter the future or the past?
Well, in chapter 5 of my book, I've got several different theories. One Jack Sarfatti taught me about, which is the Novikov principle of self-determination, which means you can't really change the future anyway. So everybody always says, oh, you don't want to come back and kill your grandfather or yourself or your father or your mother or whatever. And in physics, it is believed that couldn't happen, that whatever happens is in the reality that you were in. The many worlds theory says there are alternate realities can be created by different actions, but Novikov says that regardless, that isn't you. If you take an alternate path, that isn't the you that is still in the same reality he always was. So it gets very complicated, and I don't pretend to be a physicist. Mike is. You can ask Mike, but
it's something to aspire to, you know. I mean, if you're actually going to get into physics, you really need to get into physics because it's quite involved. I understand.
It is. Believe me, I've been listening to an email chain of physicists that Jack Sarfatti has, and I just have to laugh. They're all a bit like Sheldon on the Big Bang Theory, but right. They think maybe the good old arrow of time that always, I remember from science class, it always goes forward. Well, now they say maybe it doesn't. There's a scientist named Julian Barber who said that it may be more like an event lands in a pond and then the arrows of times go out in different directions or at least go backwards and forwards. That maybe the arrow of time, and then there's retrocausality. And I think that those who visit us are probably a military group or a quasi-military group. Possibly they're college students on a field trip to go study the ancestor. but it might be something more military-like that, well, they belong to Earth. They may be patrolling our skies. But as far as traveling back in time, this is something they do because humans do it. Maybe they don't have to. But I think they may hold a bit of a grudge toward ancestors for using nuclear energy so flagrantly. We've got radioactive waste buried that will still be radioactive in 100,000 years.
Yeah, that's a optimistic timetable. I think, it could be forever, feasibly, and if we keep messing with it, it could be forever.
And I know there's I think it's a Danish film that says, in maybe 500,000 years, beings will be walking on Earth. They'll discover these buried things, and they may think, oh, like we thought about the Egyptian ruins. Oh, well, let's open this, and maybe it's a time capsule.
Right.
So
it's a time capsule, all right.
But I think probably the UFO occupants are aware of that, and the fact that all our leaking waste, and the fact that we've contaminated the oceans with plastic and pollutants. We've exploited the land. We've cut down the trees so the cattle can graze so we can have Big Macs. We've really been an irresponsible species, I suppose, the whole time, but we didn't have technology like we've had for the last 100 years or less. So the future humans, we may have caused them a hell of a lot of problems. And so therefore, if they come back in College 101 to study us in the abductions, the catch and release or whatever, perhaps they don't feel so guilty. And humans would do that anyway. We're not perfect, and neither are they. We'd abduct another human. Of course we would if we were studying something and it was okayed by our society.
Do you think that our use of anything nuclear, anything radioactive is a primitive activity? Do you think in the future we're gonna steer away from that and use something more practical that doesn't destroy us physically and our planet?
I do, because I think that as the climate grows worse, we've placed even nuclear plants just for electrical power on oceans, on rivers, right next to, because they need the water. Look at Fukushima.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
Wow. And
it's been, for the U.S. to have dropped those two bombs in the first place, it's an unimaginable. I mean, I've been scared of it ever since I can remember understanding English. Duck under our desk, as if that would help. It's a nightmare, and of course we humans just kept going with it. The people that wasn't it. Well, certainly Einstein, but was it von Braun or regretted ever having, or Oppenheimer? I get all those. Yeah,
I think it's all of the above. Yeah,
all of the above felt terrible that they had advanced the discovery of it.
Yeah, there's that.
It's bad news, and there's so many other sources of energy, including probably free energy. I'm not a big expert on Tesla, but it seems, it makes sense that the way it's explained. So yes, the nuclear, they showed up, the UFOs showed up in the modern era in 45, 47. And I think that was probably why they picked up activity.
In our exchange of emails, there was something that really blew my mind, because it literally hit not close to my home, but really at my home. And I kind of want to blow your mind along with me as I talk about this, but you'd emailed me, and it was about Maelstrom Air Force Base, which is basically in my backyard, or was. That's where I grew up, just north of there, and which controlled our ballistic missiles with lots of nuclear warheads scattered between Great Falls, Montana, and Canada, which I grew up right in the midst of that. And one of the things that I tell people all the time, and being a kid who spent a lot of time outdoors, an incredible amount of time, and I'd seen so many incredible things that that I couldn't explain, and one of those in particular, and that you had mentioned, UFOs overhead and in that area. And when I was a kid, we would sleep outside. And I know people who listen to the show have heard me say this over and over and over again, but I tell them, if you want to see UFOs, come to north central Montana, and spend some time outside just looking straight up, and you're going to see things. And my friends and I did all the time. So why did you write about Maelstrom Air Force Base and Minot Air Force Base?
I wrote about them to make the point that who would want to try and send us a message that our ICBM missiles, warheads, were that we shouldn't have them. Turn them off, show that somebody could control them. They could go badly out of control. They flew over and turned them off, turned them back on again. It has to do with the message on nuclear, perhaps on a coming nuclear war, or at least on using nuclear warheads. And at that time, which was, Maelstrom was 67. We didn't question it even as much as some of us do today. It was just that we'd had the contest with the Soviet Union to build up the missiles, just that old mindset of war without thinking of the suffering, the casualties, and in this case, could contaminate the entire planet, could wipe out all life as we know it. There might be not even a cockroach, might be a microbe left behind. And such a unique planet, today we have a better idea of how unique Earth is as we look at exoplanets and telescopes. So many are interesting, but we have yet to find one that has all the wonderful coincidences that Earth has, from the right-sized satellite to the Goldilocks zone from the sun, just everything. And we just destroy it without, or have that threat, and for the sake of war. It's just terrible.
And I want to add to that list, we have the Van Allen belt. So why do you think that, did we just happen to get lucky and evolve in an amazing place that takes such good care of us? Or is the future lending itself to modifying the planet for a better human race? Why are we so lucky to be here?
I don't know. We evolved here because Earth is so friendly to life that we had time to become sentient. As far as what their world is like, I don't know. I mean, I could give an authoritative idea on it, which I don't even really have. And it wouldn't be, then I'd be making myself one of those UFO experts that tells you what the Zeta ambassador said last night. I don't know. I'm not omniscient on this topic. For all I know, these are a smaller group of survivors than the billions of people that are on Earth now, that maybe held on to advanced tech. Or maybe they actually got it right. Could we ever do that? and it's something like a Star Trek future with a Federation and a Starfleet, that would be wonderful. But knowing us, I'm sure probably their world isn't, not only they're dealing with all that we left behind, which is really formidable. I mean, the climate change, how can a person even survive on Earth if the climate continues to go like it is? And Antarctica is melting, and maybe, that'll stop and get turned around, but not without tremendous effort, which isn't even being made by leaders. So I don't know what they come from. Again, are they leisurely college students that have a field trip, or are they tough? The woman on my cover, I always kid that maybe she's artificial intelligence, because she looks kind of tough, like she's been through a lot. I mean, she's attractive, but I like the way Sebastian, the artist, did her. She's looking through eyes that have seen some things, as they say. So, yeah, I don't know what the world is like, what the Earth is like, but it has advanced technology.
I've had several guests on my show and who have been involved with the United States Air Force, and I don't even know how I want to phrase this, but I think it's fairly prevalent in the UFO community that the United States Air Force has interactions with some type of UFO and their occupants. Do you have anything to add to that statement?
No, I don't actually, because I don't have contacts in military. It's mostly just what I read, like the Navy and the Nimitz and the Tic-Tacs and all. But I don't really have anything to add to that.
What about traveling back in time? We talked about time travel, and you talked about is it Jack Sarfatti?
Sarfatti or Sarfatti.
I just wanted to go back into that because he feels that he has a formula for a low power warp drive, and and you just mentioned the Tic-Tacs, and that's evidence that travel in zero gravity bubble would provide some sort of key to the time travel as well as warp drive. It's quite incredible that our armed forces are out there flying around and they're seeing these things. And I just wonder what this interaction would be. What would be the purpose? Is it a demonstration? Any ideas there?
Well, only to add to what you're saying, in that the Tic-Tacs whoever it is, must have known that the Navy did these maneuvers every year in the same place. So there were the Tic-Tacs kind of waiting. And they didn't fire on the Navy jets. They didn't they didn't hide from them. They didn't get out of the way or never be seen, so that they showed up on radar. There was apparently a whole contingent of them on radar several times. Obviously, I think they wanted to be seen. And when they engaged the Navy jets, to me, they acted like Tom Cruise and Top Gun. To me, that was very human of whatever's in the Tic-Tac, even if it's an AI system. The zero warp or the zero gravity, Sarfatti says, protects the pilot, so that diving from 80,000 feet to 15 feet over the ocean the G-forces don't explode one's head because of the zero gravity bubble that is around the craft. But as far as what they were doing there, they seem, well, Dr. Knuth, I'm not sure if the K is pronounced.
Kevin, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Kevin said perhaps the Tic-Tacs were looking at whales which were migrating, and that there was even a churning of the water. And the Navy pilot said that whatever this thing churning under the water was, it was the size of a 747 plane. Well, that's a whale. So, I mean, that could be a whale. And also that similar craft have been reported along whale migrations up by Oregon. So perhaps, and then some skeptical person said, well, maybe they were hunting the whales. The Tic-Tacs are hunting the whales, so that erases the Star Trek movie, the whale. But I don't, no, there's no, I think they would have been just observing, maybe communicating with. I mean, you can take that very positively or very negatively. But it seemed to me like they, I know one of the Navy pilots said he was chasing this thing, and the next thing he knew, it had hopped behind him. It was like who's ever got the most advanced technology wins, and we're all hot dogs, you know. It was pilots, Navy pilots, military pilots. That was the psychology of how the Tic-Tacs acted with our Navy pilots. And I know Flavor, the Navy pilot, said, oh, do I want to fly one of those things? So that's not proof, but it's kind of forensic-like profiling that perhaps the Tic-Tac pilots have a human psychology. That's just a guess. But Dr. Sarfatti's low-power warp, he's in his 80s. He's 82, I think. And he was originally known as the hippie physicist back when I know I loved the Tao of physics that came out in the 70s, and the dancing, what was it, the dancing woo? It was when new physics, quantum physics, first burst on the scene, and it had all these new age ideas like that which is being looked for is that which is doing the looking. And I remember all this from this book that I loved, The Tao of Physics. Well, he was all part of that movement, but he's become more conservative over time, but he's always been a maverick physicist. He gets private financing, and you know, somebody said he might have been the model for the guy, what was his name, the doctor in Back to the Future. Yeah. He's a character, right? But he's also brilliant, and or is he? I mean, you can't. If you're not a physicist, you don't have a clue. But he's been very helpful to me, and I think it might take a special physicist to kind of leap beyond and, you know, come up with this. So we've got the whole formula in the book and his interview, and he explains it.
People have an incredible experience, or let's say they meet an incredible person and attribute those talents to something or someone that isn't human because they have a hard time believing that humans are capable of that. Do you ever feel that we aren't giving ourselves enough credit for our own capabilities and we don't try to enhance those?
That's in my final chapter, I talk a lot about Star Trek, and that, as I say, that's really my first purpose in all this is to say that we have so much potential, and for people to be so down and out about us and say, well, we're not going to make it into the future anyway, and then some of those people sort of leap to the fact of, well, I'll follow it's the ETs or that's where I'm going to hop to, and other people say, well, there aren't any ETs either. This is just we don't deserve to go on, and this is among, you know, intelligent people. We just have kind of lost that old. I think we need challenges to look outside ourselves. We've looked inside quite a bit, and we're all bickering and dickering on the least little thing. But I think exploration and discovery is part of our uniqueness and part of our great ability, and we need to do that. Even to risk astronauts, it doesn't have to always be just probes, so that, as somebody, the villain on Star Trek said, so that nobody need die in space. Well, we need to think in terms of ourselves as a species. We're overpopulated on Earth. We're like a cancer on the face of Earth as far as for the good of the planet. And it's time for a whole new, now for something completely different, to quote Monty Python. And that's kind of my goal in the final chapter, to connect consciousness, the human consciousness. You know, when somebody looks into their ancestry, as is popular now, they might learn about maybe their great aunt who went through the Irish famine, but she survived. She came to Ellis Island. And who's ever looking into it says, oh, this has really inspired me. I'm going through a rough time, but look what she went through. She's my blood. She's my aunt. And we need to do that with our future. We all love our grandchildren. I happen not to have any, but figuratively, we all love our grandchildren. But we just have a blind spot as far as the future of our species. We don't think in terms of the human race in that sense. And we're too individual, I guess. But we need some inspiration and to start really moving forward. We can't hold back science, but we need to do it intelligently. The same toward AI. That could be a nightmare, but it could be great if we do it right for once.
What about some of those technologies and abilities that we came equipped with? There are some exceptions in our evolution that aren't really explained in some definite notable periods where humans have had some advanced technology, and there's evidence of that. So has there been a period of with, to lack a better term, has there been a period of de-evolution or backward evolution, and in the notion that our species have reverted to some point, and maybe we're a little bit more primitive right now than we were maybe 2,500 years ago in Egypt? Does that make sense?
It does make sense to me, because I think I'm not criticizing any religions of today, but I think the Dark Ages and religions and the lust for power of a few men and men, women have been, for many, many years, have been considered more lowly in almost every culture. And, you know, that's missing half the potential of the human race, and maybe more than half. So women have a lot of potential. So, yes, it's been held back, and what has held us back is also what the powers that be worry about today, with perhaps more than ET disclosure, worry about disclosing future humans in UFOs as visiting us, because when you think of it, after people get over the shock of that, many people would follow them. Goodness, they must have the cure for cancer and so many diseases. They must have a better Earth if they can do all these things. Maybe they do and don't, but technologically and scientifically, they are advanced beyond us. People are so disgusted with leadership on Earth, a certain segment would gladly follow them, and there goes the power of the current leadership at governments, churches. So they really kind of threaten that. And then if you get into the idea that perhaps, this is one of the further out ones, well, not really, that they can come back to any time. So did they go back? In the book, I go into a chapter on the Greek gods. I just took one civilization. Were the Greek gods possibly sort of community organizers of a group of future humans. I don't want to take away from the current human ability in any point in time to make great structures and great civilizations. Maybe we just did it all with slaves and inspiration. But what if a group came back and, okay, UFOs tend to hang around mountains. They set up on Mount Olympus, inside or whatever they do with around mountains, and they became known to the Greek people. They would come down, and the Greek people talked about their Greek gods kind of like we talk about celebrities. They seem to be very real. So if the Greek people just imagined gods, it seems like it's more real than that. Some of the stories, of course, are brutal and far out. But in the book, I used the example of the conspiracy theory that Hillary Clinton had the pedophile ring in the pizza parlor. Well, that's like the Greeks talked to each other, and the stories got bigger and bigger and more terrible. We always do that. So there could have been groups of community organizers that there are now, because they're still going back to we're in the eternal now. They're going to those ancient civilizations, and if not building things literally, they are guiding civilization, trying to shove along the civilization idea and bring us away from complete chaos. Again, not saying they're perfect. Maybe they don't care about violence or whatnot, but generally in a positive direction. But then we hit the Dark Ages and just many centuries of, and I guess maybe they didn't interfere in that. Maybe there's a policy of more interference back in the Greek days than there is to, shoot the Pope in 1100. Maybe you can't do that. I don't know how much. The prime directive, to use Star Trek, is definitely in the mix here, because otherwise the whole thing doesn't make much sense. But I think there's a lot that they can't do. They probably have a book bigger than our income tax rules.
That'd be a big book.
On the prime directive. It's very complicated.
Very complicated.
But I think it's varied at different times throughout the history of the world.
So how can we nurture the talents that we hold, but maybe we're not taking advantage of those, or maybe we're completely ignoring those talents? How can we enhance that and create a better world with basically our minds? Where do we start?
Oh, I wish I had the answer to that. We've had spiritual messages for years, and that, like the New Age, just kind of turned into a giant meism of sweat lodges and your special gemstone and all of that. Nothing so bad about that, but I don't know. It may take the extreme threat of, say, climate change to finally knock some sense into us. Maybe, I know Churchill said Americans always do what's right, but it's the last thing they try. And so humans are that way too. We really need to be up against it before we finally get it right. We're too complacent. So I don't have an answer for you other than just trying to spread whatever message we feel we have to try and get through. And disclosure may be coming in drips and drabs and dabs and drabs in drips. To me, if it was recognized that it's future humans in the UFOs, at least to some degrees, that might be a huge part of disclosure and sort of be a jolt to the human race. But I don't have an answer, really. I guess each individual is a little different in how they set about trying to do something positive.
You have 2 websites out there. Talk about those and where people find them and what's at those websites.
My good old big website is www.earthchangepredictions.com. And it's my webmaster says it's an old website and we can't add anything new to it or it might crash. But it's a wonderful website. I get all sorts of compliments on it. It's got many pages, a lot to read, a lot of my writing, and so that's the main one. And then I've recently tried to make a website entitled Team Time Travel. And my goal is just to kind of harness people that do respond to the book. Probably not too many people would really want to sort of enter be part of a group. Maybe there would be a lot, but not to let this book go by without trying to connect to more people, as Mike and I were just saying in an email today, try and change the paradigm of the ET hypothesis. And but I'm not a web builder, so the new site, I jokingly say, looks like a single wide mobile that's been decorated badly. It's not, and it's not done either, but it's kind of interesting. So that's teamtimetravel.com. And those are my 2 websites. And the book is available on Amazon Kindle. And I think it's free right now on Kindle if you belong to a particular Kindle group or, pay an overall fee for Kindle. I don't have Kindle, but anyway, it's on Amazon Kindle.
Diane Tessman has been my guest, and the book is Future Humans and UFOs, Time for New Thinking. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. I enjoyed it.
My Alien Life Podcast.
You can find my website at www.myalienlifepodcast.com, and please subscribe to my latest downloads at iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, and at podbean.com. And please follow me and like me on Facebook and Twitter. My Alien Life is written and produced for broadcast at Studio 254 in the Northern Rocky Mountains. The music you are hearing is produced and created by Elion. You can find all Elion's work online at Heart Dance Records.